Mom's right up there near the top. A lot of you, like me, Mom is not with you now, but great memories. Great memories. This may be the most unusual Mother's Day message you've ever heard in your life. The very text itself probably would indicate that. So just bear with me. Luke chapter 15, very familiar story. Luke 15, verse 11. And he being Jesus, said, a certain man had two sons. And Sam said to his father, Father, give me the portion of goods that falleth to me. And he divided unto them his living. And not many days after, the younger son gathered all together and took his journey into a far country, and there wasted his substance with riotous living. And when he had spent all, there arose a mighty famine in that land, and he began to be in want. He went and joined himself to a citizen of that country, and he sent him into his fields to feed swine. And would he have fain have filled his belly with the husk that the swine did eat? And no man gave unto him. He came to himself and said, how many hired servants of my father's have bread enough to eat and to spare, and I perish with hunger? I will arise and go to my father, and will say unto him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before thee, and am no more worthy to be called thy son. Make me as one of thy hired servants. And he arose and came to his father. But when he was a great way off, the father saw him and had compassion, and ran and fell on his neck and kissed him. And the son said unto the father, Father, I have sinned against heaven and in thy sight, and am no more worthy to be called thy son. But the father said to his servants, bring forth the best robe and put it on him, and put a ring on his hand and shoes on his feet. And bring hither the fatted calf and kill it, and let us eat and be merry. There are in reality probably at least three individuals mentioned in this story. One of them, if we would have read a little farther, elder brother, which is a sermon within itself, we would have been more acquainted with. But in the text that we read, within that context, there's basically two people. There is a father and a young son. And you're all familiar with the story. But there is, within this story, I believe, an unmentioned mother. And I don't like to add my own words and thoughts and ideals in Scripture, but I really don't think that we get in trouble by just creating an image of this unmentioned mother. Hence the title of the sermon, The Prodigal Son's Mother. Now, what is really amazing about this, and as we get into it and begin to develop it, you'll see it. And I am not suggesting they are one and the same. But there is an incredible woman who is a mother that's mentioned in Proverbs chapter 31. And if we use our mind and think of from what we know about the prodigal son's unmentioned mother, and then we'll read some of the things that we do know about the Proverbs 31 woman. There is an incredible semblance between the two. There's four noteworthy things that we're going to look at this morning. And we're going to be looking at them from the heart and eyes of that wayward son, the prodigal. Came to his father. He said, Father, give unto me the portion of the goods that you have laid aside for me, my inheritance. Now that was very selfish. And this father had every right to refuse him. No. But he didn't. And by the way, it said he gave unto them. He gave unto both sons the inheritance that awaited them. The younger son, and that might have been a little clue, perhaps immature. Perhaps he was a visionary. It seems as though he had the far country on his mind. The older brother, he's content, taking care of the farm. The younger brother has been following in his footsteps, but he's sick of it. I want to venture out. I want to explore. I want to find out what's out there in the far country. But he needed revenue to do that. That's why he goes to his father and asks for his inheritance. The father grants the request. Now you know the story. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on it because we want to look at mom. For a while, this guy's the life of the party. Goes into the pub and he says, "Set him up, Joe." grounds on me. Everybody loves the prodigal until he runs out of money. He don't have a job. He has no income. Been living off of his inheritance. He's not only been satisfying his own lusts and wants, but there's a lot of others that are hanging on to his coattail. Also, about that time, there was a famine, a severe famine that hit. It was destitute. People didn't have food. He certainly didn't. He was on the verge of starving. Someone who had a little spark of kindness, didn't know this guy from Adam, said, well, I'll tell you what, about the best I can do is you go out and feed the hogs. And he looked at what he was feeding the hogs, and he was so hungry that he considered eating it himself. It's bad. There's a great, great verse in that text. It's always been one of my favorites. And a lot of you already know what it is. When he came to himself. Some of us have spent some time in the far country. We understand this. And again, we're going to tie it to mom first. Listen to what he realized. He come to a realization. And what he realized was this. Life on the farm, life at home, when he came to himself, he said, how many hired servants of my father's have bread enough and to spare? They have all they need to eat, and they have leftovers. They have more. And these are servants of his father. You know who would have primarily been the organizer in the home? It wasn't Dad. Dad's this great compassionate guy who's out there watching for his son, and when his son comes home, he goes out and falls on his neck and kisses him. No, it's not him. You know who is seeing to it that all of the needs of the family are met? Mom. And he realized it occurred to him things were not as bad at home. My situation really don't fit here because I did. Even Phil Snyder, I knew right. She knew she. We both had incredible moms. But I could tell you story after story after story of young people who followed the suit of this prodigal. I want to challenge you, young people. You think life is a drudgery. Mom and dad are old fogies. They're so out of touch. Learn a lesson from this young man and from a lot of the rest of us. He realized that home life was nowhere near as bad as he thought it was. That's what he realized. Second thing, what he remembered. What he remembered. He began to reflect back on some things that he had been taught. In verse 18, he said, I will arise and go to my father, and will say unto him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before thee. Hiring out to a pig farmer for this young Jewish boy was the last straw. Pushed him over the edge. So he decided that he was going to go home and acknowledge his sinfulness. Now, how does this relate to mom? What I'm going to tell you is not the absolute case every time. I understand that. But as far as morality and what is right and what is wrong, you know who teaches that most in homes? Moms. I'm the preacher. I'm the pastor. And I promise you that our daughters and our grandchildren will tell you that the one who has tried to lead them spiritually has been their mom, grandma. There's so many here that can relate to that. You know, dads just think, well, they know. They know. But mom shows. Mom shows. And when the child does something questionable, or the grandchild, most of the time who steps in is mom or grandmother. He remembered that. What was it that made him say, I'm going to go back home and I'm going to say to my father, I have sinned against heaven. I have sinned against you. What was it? It was how he had been raised. It was his upbringing. And that part primarily would have come from his mom. Proverbs 31 verse 26. She openeth her mouth with wisdom. Wisdom. Fathers, the male part, we major on intellect. Learning things. You know what moms exercise? Wisdom. Wisdom. And that comes much from her makeup as a female. Compassion. It's what he remembered. What his mama, and just go with me on this, what his mama told him when she set him on her lap and said, son, here's the way it is. That stayed with him Thirdly, how he was robed. Robed. He was clothed with fine array. When he came home, the father was out in the field waiting for his son. We credit him. Why wasn't mom out there? She was busy doing everything else that we've already talked about. She still has a son at home. Father has nothing else to do but go out and stand in the field and wait for his boy. When he saw that son coming home, he was so tattered. What clothes he had on his body would have been torn, dirty. He was barefooted. He had no shoes on his feet. So the father said to the servants, verse 22, bring forth the best robe and put it on him, and put a ring on his hand and shoes on his feet. Now, everyone in that day didn't wear a robe. No, they would wear an outer garment, but it was not a robe. Robes were special. They had very intricate design. And the only people really that wore robes were people of distinction. It's one of the ways you could always tell that particular person. Put a ring on his finger. That's the signet ring. That showed that the individual was a part of a family. I think he left there with a ring. I think he probably pawned it. He's starving to death. The father looks down and sees the ring is missing. He said, bring the signet ring. Put it on his finger, because he's a part of this family. And he said, not only bring the robe, not only bring the ring, bring some shoes and put on his feet. By the way, shoes were another sign of distinction. Most servants in that day were barefooted. Bring some shoes, put them on his feet. Go with your mind to that Proverbs 31 woman. It says in verse 21, all her household are clothed with scarlet. She's a seamstress. Verse 22, she maketh herself coverings of tapestry. She saw to it that her family was adorned. And the father could say, bring the robe, bring the ring, bring the shoes. But do you know where that responsibility would have came from? Mom. The mother. So he goes from being almost naked, tethered, torn, to wearing a robe, the ring on his finger and shoes on his feet. Well, we've seen what he realized. You know, life at home wasn't anywhere near as bad as I thought it was. We've seen what he remembered. He remembered those things Mama had taught him as a young child. They were still there. He was robed. Mama had saw to it that these items were available. But there's one more. What he received after closing the boy, the father told the servants, verse 23, bring hither the fatted calf and kill it, and let us eat and be merry. Now, knowing this story, this particular story, this family was probably pretty well to do. It's clearly mentioned that they had servants. But it goes back to what I said in the very beginning. There's the organization of the household. That would have been mom's responsibility. Food preparation. Much of it may have been done by servants, but mother oversaw it. Mother made the menu. This boy comes home famished, starved. And Dad says, go kill the fatted calf, the one that's put up especially for a situation such as this, because we're going to party. We're going to party because our son, who was wayward, who was prodigal, has come home. It's time to rejoice. It's time to be merry. Proverbs 31, verse 15. She riseth also while it is yet night, and giveth meat to her household, and a portion to her maidens. This Proverbs 31 woman, no doubt, probably was well off too. She was an entrepreneur, but she saw that everything was taken care of within the household, even to the feeding of her maidens. It's incredible. Now, I know you had to stretch your mind a little bit on this, but I don't think this is too far off. I really don't. And I always I've learned a long time ago to condition these things, because I know everyone didn't grow up with the kind of mom that sought to do these things. I understand that. By the way, if you think there's a lot of bad moms in the world, there's a whole lot more deadbeat dads. A whole lot more. Today, we salute moms. In my mind, beautifully illustrated by the prodigal son's mother. Moms, those of you who have heard this, I don't want you to be intimidated. God did not put Proverbs 31 in the Bible to intimidate moms. No. It's an example. It's as though we could say, Mother, spell